I'm going to talk first, but this is mainly about Yusraa. My name is Richard Hall and I work here in education studies. I had the very great privilege of being able to supervise Yusraa's undergraduate dissertation last year, which has catalysed some more work, and we'll just mention that at the very end. And the way in which we negotiated this would be done would be effectively, I'll question Yusraa about her case study in relation to an exploration of student loans as a barrier to higher education for Muslims who are particularly reading of Sharia law, which denies them the ability to take out interest-bearing loans. Would you like to introduce yourself, Yusraa?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Yusraa. I recently graduated from DMU and I was studying education studies with psychology. So this was my dissertation topic. So it started off as a personal experience, and then I started researching it during my degree, and eventually I did my project on this. So, Richard, did you want to add anything?
I'm not adding anything, no, Tom. You click on. Would you tell us about the... So there's clearly something that's autobiographical here, as there quite often is in these dissertations. What else was the rationale and the background for the work?
So it starts off with me being a Muslim. So Islam is one of the largest religions, and it's the fastest growing religion. And it actually in Britain, the approximate population in 2021 was 3.87 million. And the reason why I'm saying that is so you get an idea of how many people this could be impacting. And for those who don't know, the word Islam means the total submission to God, which then brings peace. So the word Muslim means linguistically referring to those who worship one God, submitting to one God, and following the Islamic way of life. Now, Islam is not just a spiritual practice, it's a whole system, a whole way of life. So in it includes economic structures, which within prohibits the engagement with riba. Now, riba can be understood as usury or interest. So in other words, if you are like having a loan and it's set for a predetermined time with the premise that you'll pay excess, that excess is the interest that Muslims are not allowed to pay or take. So as the student loan system contains interest, this then means it can act as an exclusion to Muslims who are trying to attend university. So this problem was actually already recognized by the government back in 2014, and a new system was promised to be put in place that overcomes this barrier, but it's 2023 and it's still not happened. So that leads to the question of how is this impacting Muslims, and that is what my study was on.
More on the background, yeah. What was the literature telling you?
Okay, so when I was doing the literature review and I realized how limited there was of research, I did find that a study found that 6,000 Muslims chose not to attend higher education because of the student loans. And also that 1 in 6 Muslims were funding their higher education independently, so away from the loan system. So then this made me think about what is the impact of this on their academic and career aspirations. Like for me, even my college decision after I left school was influenced by this, because instead of A-levels, I did a course because I knew I could get into work. And so I didn't think I could go to university at that time. And then the second question is, if Muslims are then having to work extra to pay for their education, how are their work-life balance impacted by this?
We had a lot of negotiation over the research questions, as you always do, you know. But those are kind of what they kind of boiled down to. So then there was a kind of sense of, well, how are you going to, what's your field work look like in order to address those research questions? So tell us about those. Tell us about that.
So we ended up doing 5 semi-structured interviews with Muslims who were following Islamic principles on usury, and so they had experienced the student loan system as a barrier. So they didn't need to have taken the loan or have not taken the loan, as long as they fit that criteria. We interviewed them. And we did purposive sampling. So the way we did this was advertising through the University Islamic Society, and that's how we got the participants. And then we used thematic analysis to get themes. And
I'm going to interject at this point, because one of the other really interesting things is that quite often, certainly kind of students of colour, our black students, want to do work in relation to race and ethnicity, and the Information Commissioner's Office regards that as special category data, which requires a particular approach in terms of institutional approaches to data protection and data protection impact assessments. So one of the things that we did, deliberately because of Yusraa, and because I'm chair of faculty research ethics, because I did something terrible in a previous life, we generated a process for umbrella DPIA so that undergraduate students could kind of get this work done without it being kind of bunged up within information governance within the faculty. So we've created some umbrellas for 9 students based on Yusraa's work within education for last year, so that students understand kind of the ways in which those data might be covered in relation to kind of religious belief, but also race and ethnicity. So that work needs celebrating as well. What did you find? What was the first big thing you found, Yusraa?
So the first theme was money and its relationship to choice, so how this impacted Muslims' decisions. So what we found was actually all the participants who I interviewed had chosen a different degree subject to what they originally wanted to do because of the fact that it was cheaper, so less years. So for example, one participant wanted to study medicine, but because of the length of years that takes and the more expensive it will be, they instead went to pharmacy. So then that brings about the question of how many careers are now not happening because of it being too expensive. This also included postgraduate study. So I think, again, it was almost all the participants. They wanted to do masters or postgraduate studies, but they didn't do it because it's more fees are needed, more expensive. And I can relate to that as well, because I would have actually liked to do a master's this year, but one of the reasons why I couldn't was because of the funding. I needed to save up first. And an interesting finding was that the participants who were Muslims who did take the student loans, they still found this as a barrier, because in order to get rid of the interest that they were accumulating, they were then going to pay back the loans in lump sums rather than the way it works with a percent of your income taken. So that means they were trying to quickly get into a job as well so that they could get rid of the interest and pay in those lump sums. So I even had one participant who she expressed how she wanted to be an architect and she wanted to work in design, but after taking the student loan and being in her studies, she just wanted to get out, get a job, pay it off, and because she's just seeing the interest accumulate and it's getting too much. Another thing was, like, all these participants, they came from post-92 universities, so, and also by what they expressed, they're likely coming from working class backgrounds. So now it's not just about religion, it's also about social class and how they're both working together to make the student loans as a barrier.
Before we move on, that third point's fundamental, because when you crunch the numbers, you realise that the last thing you want to do is pay that debt off. You will pay more by paying it off than you will by taking it as graduate tax and having it written off. So that these students those students in particular, it's doubling down on them and their kind of and their economic kind of prosperity.
Yeah, and the other part of that was also the location of the university. So this isn't just for the tuition loans; it's also for the maintenance loans. So students were choosing universities based on, again, what was cheaper, which means if you're next to a university that maybe isn't as great as another one or doesn't have the course that another one does, in order to be able to afford to go, they're going to those ones because they don't have to pay for accommodation and travel and those kind of things.
The second one's work-life balance then. What were your participants telling you about that?
So the second theme was the work-life balance and its impact. So though there was a difference in the findings compared to those who had family supporting them and those who did not. So the ones who had their family supporting them, their work-life balance was much healthier, although they did still have issues of like guilt and because they feel guilty about their parents paying and helping them. But the ones who were paying by themselves, they expressed that they had a terrible work-life balance, and it also meant that they had to choose what they could afford. So for example, resources such as university books and those kind of things, they had to choose what they can buy, what they can afford, which then impacted their education. I think one participant expressed that she was working 37.5 hours a week, including night shifts. She said it was terrible, there was no balance, and that her life didn't exist. So it wasn't just impacting her university, it was also impacting her general livelihood. And for the participants who did have family support, because they were still coming from low-income backgrounds, their parents were putting all their money to pay for their fees. So that meant that they felt bad about asking money for other things such as clothes, and one person even said food and things like that. So when you look at all these factors, how is that now impacting your education? There was another theme that kind of came up, but I couldn't cover because I ran out of words. But it was their relationship with education because of this. So a lot of them talked about how at the beginning it was like a love for learning, a love for the subject. They really wanted to go into it because they loved it. But once they're in it and the pressure of working and having to finance it, it's now become just to get into a job, just to pay it off. It's not about learning anymore. It's about a means to an end, and it's not something they enjoy anymore.
So we discussed some. I demanded that you come up with some recommendations. So would you like to talk us through those, or the key ones?
Yeah. So for students, and this would be for students who are in my position and also this position of the participants, develop positive relationships with the academics, because that really helped me. Because once you develop those relationships, when you need help, you can get help, even if that means you need extensions on things. So that would be my first point. A second would be to spread awareness, because had I not spoken to Rosie when I first attended DMU and told her about my experience, I wouldn't be here today. So it becomes your strength, so spread awareness. And also, in order to solve a problem, like I said in the other session, people need to know it's a problem. And then the third point would be, it's more personal. It would be just for, if I was speaking to someone directly in my position, I would say don't compromise on your religious beliefs. There's always going to be ways to overcome barriers, and just from an Islamic perspective, if you do something for the sake of God, you'll see that doors will open unexpectedly. And it was actually a piece of advice that I heard from another girl before I attended university, who also did the same thing, and she said the same thing. And I saw it work out in reality, because my first year, I didn't think I would attend university. I managed to save up, I went. At the end of my first year, I didn't know how I was funding my second, and at the end of my second, I didn't know how I was funding my third, but it happened, because things happened unexpectedly. So I'd say don't compromise. And for some more practical solutions, apply to scholarships, bursaries, apply to everything you can find. And if you need to, take gap years, because when you're thinking about it, you might think, oh no, I'm delaying my journey and everything. But when you actually take a gap year, and especially if you work in a field that you're interested in to do with your course, it works as a strength for you, because now you have an experience to take with you. And for program teams, I think a simple one would just be make resources available, so that it's about the financial problems. So available online, that makes things easier. For the university, now this one I dealt with personally. So a lot of additional funding, whilst they're there, in order to apply for it, you need to show that you're eligible. In order to show you're eligible, you have to say that you're with the student loans. So if you haven't taken student loans and you would have been eligible, you're not eligible. So then that excludes a whole load of students. And for policymakers, it's the same thing. So full-time students are generally not eligible for benefits, because they view the student loan system as a means of income. However, even if they could, you need to show you in the student loan system in order to get funding. And the final thing for policymakers, and probably the biggest thing, would be the implementation of the Sharia-compliant loan system that was sorted out in 2014. The latest thing that they've said, which was about the new student loan system, was that they'll release it after 2025, but not in 2025, so who knows what that means.
So Yusraa's example is a gift working with Yusraa in all sorts of ways, and Yusraa's example has kind of led to an awareness of the fact that within our decolonising project we didn't really think about the intersection with faith, if I'm honest. That had been missing in all sorts of ways. I needed kind of elevating. So we've got some funding as part of an academic innovation project to thankfully, Yusraa has not been able to afford to go and do the masters that she should be doing. So she's working as a brilliant teaching assistant in the city and is research assistant on a project that is looking to extend her own dissertation, looking with a focus on retention. So effectively, what is it that, where's the stickability coming from, effectively, and how does the institution kind of engage with that and create a space to celebrate that and work with that? As part of that, there's a connection, and Yusraa and Samaya, who's presenting, I think, next door. We've had a conversation with the Aziz Foundation about what that might mean in the context of a Muslim-friendly higher education institution with a focus on kind of the experience of British Muslim students. So we're trying to extend into that space. And finally, not thinking about conflating refugee status with faith in any way, but one of the things that's kind of, this has opened up is some work in thinking about how we create a stage for a full range of voices made marginal to kind of take the conscience to speak, and one of those is in relation to refugee status, and we had a couple of students come to talk to us in relation to some SDG work around their refugee status and their experience of the institution and what they thought about higher ed in relation to that. So we're trying to create a kind of smorgasbord of alternative voices that crack open the idea of the student voice in this institution. The final thing I would say before I finish is that I really do want to celebrate the fact that Yusraa also, which you didn't want me to say this, won the Education Studies Prize last year, and I think it's like super. That's a whole range of stuff, but the qualitative dissertation also being a brilliant representative, but also the work on data protection impact assessments and all the functional bureaucratic living death of the institution. So, thank you for your time.